Welcome, chosen ones. It isn't a war, but rather a different place. That's the most uncomfortable room in the world. It's a place where people have to agree on a lie that is beginning to fall apart. This is the kind of room where the story starts. It wasn't loud or dramatic, and there were no raised voices at first. Just a meeting behind a closed door where everyone thought they were in charge when they walked in and left emotionally broken. Because here's something that's a fact but not talked about much. Group stories only last if everyone is ready to lie at the same time. As soon as someone isn't sure about what they're saying, the whole system starts to spill the truth, and these leaks turn into floods in no time. This meeting wasn't about a celebration. It was not planned. It didn't win. It was an attempt to hide the damage, pretending to be confident. These were people who had already talked about you a lot, in a relaxed way, like they were doing something fun. But this time, things were not the same. This time, your name didn't have the same effect. It was a lot to deal with in the room. It made stops. It made them look at each other's eyes. And nothing reveals a lack of confidence faster than silence filled with doubt. What caused them to break wasn't anything new. The time of an old truth had finally come. You didn't pass out like they said you would. You didn't lose control like they wanted you to. You weren't able to become the person who would have deserved to be treated that way. And when people see that their guesses were wrong, they usually lose their faith, often crying in the process. There is a kind of dark humor about watching people practice confidence and unintentionally regret it. They thought everyone would be on the same page, but they ended up feeling guilty and jealous, and they awkwardly realized that as a group, they may have underestimated you, which is honestly amazing in a bad way. It takes a lot of work to be that wrong. They never planned for this part of the story. The moment when you can no longer deny your growth and their private talks turn into emotional statements. Not because you wanted to hold people responsible, not because you faced anyone, but because the truth often barges in and changes everything. So, if your name has ever felt like it meant something in places where you aren't there, don't go anywhere. It wasn't a plan that fell apart in that meeting. It was a story. And when those things break down, people don't just lose power, they also lose sleep. First, the truth seemed safe until it began to talk back to them. At first, they thought this wasn't the case. Talking would be hard. They thought it would be normal. State your name, retell the old plot, agree with the same ideas, and then go on with your life. That's how it always happened in the past. But this time, as soon as your name was said, I knew something was wrong. There was no flow to the words. They weren't sure what to do. What once seemed true now seemed planned. And practiced things fall apart when people stop believing what they are saying. You never had any big secrets. It didn't come yelling. It got here, calmly, quietly, and with evidence they weren't ready to deal with. It became clear to everyone that the picture of you they had been spreading wasn't true anymore. The more they talked, you didn't fail like they said you would. You weren't broken down. You didn't turn into an angry or unstable person. You just didn't stop. This easy fact made all of the over-the-top statements, opinions, and assumptions seem weak. Someone tried to make it less harsh by saying, maybe we misunderstood them. That line changed the mood completely. When you admit there was a mistake, you have to move blame around. All of a sudden, the truth was no longer hitting them. It was answering them. It was fixing their mistakes. And people don't like being told they're wrong after they've spent time thinking they're right. It wasn't what you said or did that hurt so much. Not what you did. You didn't stand up for yourself. You didn't give an explanation. You didn't even try to get anyone to believe anything. You let time show what it means. And the hour is lies because it keeps going and false stories don't. That's when they knew that the truth no longer needed their say-so to exist. You weren't the reason I was crying. They were shocked to find out that the fact they didn't believe was now stronger, even though they had dismissed it and told themselves it wasn't important. It could stand all by itself. There was no need for a spokesman, and this was the worst thing for them. Once truth starts to speak for itself, there is no more argument, just things that can still be regretted. 2. They saw that all of them read you the same way. Loud words and blame weren't the most surprising things that happened in that room. It was an unbelieving silence. They had all been saying the same thing about you, sure that they were right and that their ideas were true. But when they talked about it more, they realized how different their stories were. You were all a little different because of the unique biases and personal fear or anger that someone else doesn't see it. And for the first time, they had to come clean. You weren't known by any of them. They were right in every small way. They were wrong about all the important things. They tried to make sense of the differences, but it got worse as they talked more. They sounded like they were trying too hard to explain why you did or said something because they were supporting stories that weren't true. They had built a house of beliefs, and now they had to see that it was built where nothing was before. All the lies, opinions, and gossip they spread about you suddenly felt useless. They knew then that it wasn't a person they were dealing with. They were facing a mirror of their own doubts, and that mirror didn't have to do what they said. The room became tense as they realized the weight of their mistake. It was a clear truth that no one wanted to face. They had spent a long time trying to figure you out and make predictions about your reactions, trying to control things that they didn't even realize were the simplest truth. You were never what they wanted. You weren't what they wanted, and you didn't do things the way they wanted or when they wanted. You moved in a way that followed your own rules, without making anyone think you were capable of doing otherwise. You weren't the target when the first tear fell. It was sent in. They were sad about their own ignorance and pride, and about the energy they wasted judging someone who have slowly outgrown their understanding. They knew they had misjudged not only your strength, but also your clarity, your insight, and your ability to stay safe while they were confused. You didn't make a mistake, and that understanding left the room feeling raw, exposed, and completely broken. They did, and at last, they couldn't ignore it any longer. The third point is that the power structure they built fell apart as soon as you talked about your growth. They had always been fooled into thinking they had the power to give or take away that control. They had made a mental picture of an order with a predictable, manageable, and small place for you in their story. They spent years perfecting this illusion, practicing in whispers and meetings, and convincing themselves that it was impossible for the system to fail. But all that power you worked so hard to build disappeared as soon as someone had the guts to talk about how you had grown. In the usual way, it wasn't a threat. There were no alarms or charges, and no conflicts, but just saying that made a big impact. It was too late for them to see that they couldn't stop your growth. They had planned for a lot of things to happen: anger, confusion, or even rebellion. But they had not expected this calm, certain strength. You had grown past their plots, whispers, and the boxes they tried to put you in. And as people talked about what you said, how calm you were, how smart you were, and how strong you were, they lost their faith. The base they had built their power on depended on you being less big. Now that basis was shown to be weak, empty, and reliant on a lie they could no longer support. Each time they looked at each other, they knew something was there. They all knew that their plans to keep you under their control had failed in a big way. There was a change in the room. People who were once friends drifted apart because no one wanted to admit they had overestimated you. The story that had kept them calm and in charge now silently mocked them, and the flaws in their so-called power were clear to all, including them. It wasn't what you said, what you did, or even being there that really brought the order down. You changed and grew. They had to see that you were moving forward, growing and doing well while they were stuck in envy, fear, and pride. And at that moment, they lost the idea of being in charge, making them open to the truth. They never had the power. You had it all along. 4. They finally realized that you were never the problem. They needed you to be weak. They were able to keep themselves feeling in control for a long time, thinking that the stress, the whispers, and the plans they made were reactions to how you acted. They thought the problem was outside of them and that it had something to do with the way you acted, the choices you made, or the fact that you were there. But when the truth came out, it had a huge impact. You were never the cause of their trouble. The version of you they thought would be real was what was wrong with them. The version that would trip up, second guess, and give in to their control. What was wrong with them was that they relied on your weakness. As soon as someone in that room recognized your strength, the mood changed. You weren't acting in a showy way. You weren't confrontational, demanding, or revealing. You were just you, not affected by the confusion they tried to make around you. That by itself made them face the truth they had been steering clear of. They had been making up stories, planning things out, and saying what they did was okay, because they hoped you would stay small enough to not scare them. The shock left a bad taste in my mouth. They understood that your vulnerability was linked to their sense of control, their pride, and their identity. They could no longer control you or make you feel bad about yourself, which was a wake-up call for them to face their own issues. Their fear, their jealousy, their lack of confidence. You weren't the cause of their anger. They were sad because that version of you had died, but that version had never really been alive. The version they wanted was the one that would keep them happy. There were tears, anger, and shocked silence afterward because everyone in the room had finally seen the truth. They were not failing you. You weren't being unreasonable or hard to deal with. They failed because of things inside their organization only. It wasn't your fault. They just weren't able to deal with someone who wouldn't give in. Pressure. They had put their energy, planning, and thought into trying to control something that they could never have controlled. And that harsh, undeniable truth broke them. The only thing left was the harsh fact that you had always been safe from harm. Not because of chance, but because their demands could never bring you down. Number 5. Someone in that room felt real shame, and it spread to everyone else. In every group like this, there is always one person who feels more guilty than the others. They could try to hide it, joke about it, go along with it, but it's always there, gently reminding you of every choice you make. That person finally broke in that room. In the smallest way, they accepted that what was done to you was wrong. That one acknowledgement didn't just come out of nowhere. It spread to everyone else in the room, like a wave in water. Guilt is an odd feeling that can make you do things. It doesn't stay with just one person. As soon as someone says it out loud, it makes other people face their own things. All of a sudden, the things they had said were true sounded empty. The stories they had made up to excuse their behavior stopped being easy and started feeling difficult to keep up. The person who first cracked didn't mean to take the whole room apart. But you don't have to mean to do something for shame to spread. It slowly enters the parts of the mind where pride, arrogance, and resistance used to be. They had come in thinking this was a meeting where they would plan things, come to an understanding, and be in charge, when the first signs of regret had changed when it came to light. People talked less, looked more, and the carefully planned front started to fall apart. It started to happen to the others, one by one. The burden of the facts they had turned away from, the burden of the damage they had done, and the painful clarity of knowing that a person they thought was weak had gone through it all without holding a grudge or seeking revenge. In the end, the normal talk turned into a statement of feelings they didn't expect. You weren't the one who started crying. Not out of fear, not because they were sorry about what happened, but because they clearly saw how they had failed as people. At that time, the small feeling of guilt started a chain reaction and showed that truth and conscience don't need other people to be present. They just need one person to face the truth that everyone else has been avoiding. And it wasn't about you when the emotional breakdown happened in that room. It was about them finally seeing the truth of who they were. You never fought back because of number 6. They realized that. You were too busy growing up to see them. The room was made on a foundation of expectation. They thought they would get back at you, have a fight, or make a scene. Anything that would make all the time and effort they spent on causing conflict with you make sense. For a long time they thought that eventually you would respond how they believed anyone like you would respond. But when they saw how you really were and how you really lived, they saw a truth they weren't able to handle. You didn't fight back even once, since it wasn't necessary. You were present in the fight. You had only changed the area of work. You had grown in ways they couldn't control or affect, and you were no longer fitting into the little boxes they tried to put you in. You didn't waste your energy on fighting, blaming, or making excuses. You were in charge when you set boundaries, walked anywhere, or did anything. And in this case, authority doesn't have anything to do with noise or control. It's about saying no to. Let no one else control your story or keep you from moving forward. The room was filled with a cold, heavy truth when they realized that. The silence after that was heavier than any charge. They thought there would be a lot of chaos, conflict, and sparks. Instead, they were met with a level of peace, composure, and growth that was beyond their control and understanding. Their plans to punish you or put you in your place were no longer important. They didn't want to believe that your strength didn't come from fighting. It was the result of progress, not having them. The mood in the room changed when someone finally said it. They had to accept that their actions, gossip, and plans had not been able to stop you. You were already on a level that they couldn't understand, so no one could get a rise out of you. The irony was hard to take. All their efforts to bring you down took a lot of their energy, and they only made you look stronger. In that room, the simple truth that you were moving forward in life was more powerful than any of the opposing arguments they could come up with. They weren't the ones who did it, crying out of fear of you. They realized they had been outdone without even knowing it, which is why they were crying. You grew in a way that caught everyone off guard and blew away all of their assumptions about you. Fear number 7. They aren't afraid of what you know. It's about what you went through that didn't make you like them. There were no secrets or smarts in the room that made it stressful. They weren't shaken by the revealing of facts. You went through everything and came out on top. That was a fact that couldn't be denied, without any ill will or resentment, and without using the same strategies they used to control and influence. Others may see that kind of living as dangerous. They understood that what they were afraid of didn't have anything to do with information or strategy. It was about ethics and resilience that they could never live up to. They thought everyone reacted to abuse the same way they do, with anger, plotting, and spreading fear. They thought that pain always makes people cruel, and that anyone who goes through difficult times without giving in is not normal. And when someone like you walks through chaos without being affected by the same darkness, it confuses their view of the world. It shows their moral weaknesses and how strong they really are. You didn't scare them. They were scared of what your survival showed about them. All of the comments, tears, and quiet confessions in that room were full of meaning. They saw that your persistence made it clear how different they are from who you are. Their carefully built sense of being better than others fell apart because they had judged themselves against someone they thought would fail in ways they expected. You didn't do that. You changed the way of measuring it instead. Surviving and thriving without lowering yourself to their level was a reflection they didn't want to see but couldn't help looking at. The irony hurts. While they used fear and violence to feel strong, you were strong because you were honest and able to control yourself and your emotions. And that's really scary, because you can't fight back with the same tools. The unbalance was felt right away in the room. As they understood the simple truth, the calculations, assumptions, and plans they had made fell apart in silence at the back of their minds. It wasn't what you did that was the trouble. You stayed whole, but they never would. You weren't the reason for their sadness. They were faced with a harsh image of a strength they didn't have but couldn't look away from. In number 8, they saw how much energy they wasn't able to break someone who wasn't broken in the first place. They spent a lot of time believing that they could control you, mess with you, or make you less important. They planned every whisper, every scheme, and every move they made to force you to meet their standards or break you. They believed that by putting in enough time, effort, and pressure, they would one day get the thrill of seeing you fail. But when they learned the truth, they realized something that shocked them so much that they couldn't speak. All of that energy, all of that planning and coordinating, they had thrown it all away. You stayed strong. You didn't trip. You didn't take any time at all. It wasn't just your ability to recover that made things worse for them. It happened in a way that was very quiet. You didn't need to make a big scene or say something clever to get back at them. You didn't need to get back at them. Every time they tried to hurt you, change how people saw you, or control the result, it only made you more focused, sure of your goals, and strong character. The irony was hard to take. They couldn't understand that the things they did to hurt you actually helped you grow and get ahead. The room went into a weird kind of doubt. They had to face the fact that they weren't able to control everything. They thought there were limits, but there weren't. They had judged power in fear, intimidation, chaos, and volume. What they didn't measure was how long someone could go on with no help, how clear-headed they were, and how they refused to be determined by what other people do. Every time they tried to make you weak, it showed how pointless their work was. When the emotional weight settled, the mood was full of silent understanding. They had spent a huge amount of time planning, organizing, and making excuses, but in the end, nothing changed. You stayed safe, not because they didn't have the power to hit you, but because you didn't let them bring you down to their level. They were not crying, frustrated, and silent because you won. They were around thee. They came to the conclusion that all of their efforts, plans, and hopes had been in vain. You had beaten them not by making a fuss, but by being consistently strong and reliably there. forcing them to face the most uncomfortable truth of all. No matter how hard they tried, they weren't able to break you. 9. They weren't ready to admit they had never really accepted you into their group. The most painful fact in that room didn't come from conflict, an argument or battle. It came from the understanding that you were never meant to be there. They had spent so much time trying to make you come, control what you did, and tell you what to do, that they really thought you were just another player in their game. But when they finally took a step back and honestly assessed who you are, they saw the truth. You were never meant to be with them. That understanding hurt me more than any insult could, or blame could. It wasn't about leaving people out. It was about being real. You were more honest and aware, and you had more personal power than they were able to reach. And they didn't really want to be close to you when they tried to get you to join their group. They were about limiting things. They wanted to put you in a place where people could control you, change who you are, or make you feel bad about yourself. The moment they saw the reality of the situation, that false sense of belonging was broken. You aren't the kind of person they meant to put in that circle, and why it came apart was because you didn't make yourself smaller to fit it. At first, they didn't believe it. Then, they got frustrated, ashamed, and finally, they saw they had failed. They thought that being close to someone made you better than them, that being in charge made people like you, and that being able to change someone meant that you were their equal. But being close by doesn't mean you can understand. Being in charge doesn't mean people will look up to you. Having power over others doesn't mean you are close to them. You had always been outside of their limits, quietly showing that real power and respect aren't made or forced. The room was quiet before the first tear fell. Anger was not the reason they were crying. They finally saw themselves clearly, so they cried. Everyone could see their efforts to be in charge, as well as their jealousy and lack of confidence. But they were only now forced to face it. There was a lot of irony there. It wasn't your fault that the group they put so much effort into fell apart. You had always been too far outside of it to fit in. There was nothing that planning, gossip, or strategy could do to change the truth. 10. Your name was spoken with respect, and it changed the mood completely. It was easy, only one voice, cautious and intentional, calling you by name with real admiration rather than hate or fear. The room, which had been tense for a long time, changed right away. At first, it was hard to put into words what was happening. There were small pauses, glances, and changes in stance, but everyone could feel it. Respect can show you what's false, beneath the need to show off, be better than others, or lie about oneself. And at that moment, the power they thought they had slipped away in a calm silence, with no shouts or accusations. For years, they tried to define you in a way that suited them, make you less visible, and change people's minds so that your name came to represent sensitivity and weakness. But when it was said sincerely, something snapped. The people who were sure of their story suddenly saw how empty it had always been. That one thank you made them see you as more than the tales they shared, more than the ideas they had about you. They were faced with a version of truth they had been blind to or had chosen not to see. A person with power, dignity, and an unshakable presence. The change wasn't only about feelings. It had a purpose and was meant to affect people's minds. All of the plans, tricks, and coordinated attempts to control how people think and talk about things suddenly felt small, useless, and even ridiculous. The people who were giving respect weren't sure of themselves, and it showed. You showed them how weak their own situations were. You weren't scary enough to make them cry. They cried when they saw the thing that made them feel good about themselves taken away from you, because it showed how unworthy they really were. In the end, the room was completely different from when they had first come in. The change in the situation was quiet and could not be undone. Respect doesn't need to be argued for, logically explained, or proven. It doesn't make deals, it just is. And when it comes in contact with it reveals the truth, and with the truth, all lies made to fight the truth are broken down. Talking about your name wasn't the only thing that changed the topic. It changed all of their feelings, leaving them shocked and bare, making them face the truth they had run away from for a long time. People have to recognize your presence, whether they like it or not. 11. You forgiving them without needing an apology took them by surprise. There was a quiet but strong feeling of excitement in the room. They thought that the person they would finally need to be recognized, faced, or validated. They believed that in order to forgive, they had to step forward, grovel, or give the closure they thought was due. But the truth they learned was so different from what they had believed that it changed everything. You had forgiven without needing an apology, a reason, or to be told you were right. You moved past them on your own terms, and that fact left them speechless. They had spent a long time making up stories that made their behavior and convinced themselves that you were in control of what would happen next, that the results would come when you chose. They thought they had power over that moment, how you would react, and how people would feel in the room. But there it was. You don't have to worry about what they think or feel guilty around them. What they thought would take up their attention was gone, and in its place was something they couldn't understand or change. What made things worse for them wasn't just that you let go of. You forgave me completely without saying anything. You didn't need any drama, fights, or praise. You weren't controlled by their failure to say sorry. You took your honesty, peace, and clarity with you to the next part of your life while leaving them to face the painful truth of their failures all by themselves. They were not crying out of anger. They were about being unable to do anything. The anger of knowing that they weren't able to control you anymore as soon as you said no to. Allow it to be. In that room, the burden of duty without the means to fulfill it became too much to bear. There was a quiet, clear evidence in every look, every stop, and every conversation that mercy doesn't need to be allowed. You were able to show them, not through their actions, but through yours, how little they understood, how false their ideas were, and how pointless their desire to be in charge was. You didn't gain power over them by arguing. You didn't need to take it, so they lost it. And that truth, so simple and so undeniable, took apart the emotional structure they had built over the years. 12. They finally got that you didn't lose them. They can no longer get to you. For a long time, they thought that being close to someone and having an effect on them meant that they were in charge. They thought that every time they talked to you, made a plan, tried to control, gossip, or tell you what to do, they would get a spot in your life. They saw you as a property, something they could use, control, or exhaust for their own good. But the truth they were shown in that room was too much to bear. You weren't missing anything. They could no longer get in. It wasn't a deed, a fight, or a statement that took away their power. You calmly and quietly chose to step out of their reach. You didn't have to make threats, fight, or even give an explanation. All the paths they thought they could take were blocked. Not because you were mad and said no to them, but because you knew what they could never understand. You didn't need them in your life, and they didn't make you less of a person when they left. The moment everyone realized that was happening felt like a massive wave hitting the room. They were crying, confused, and looking at each other in ways that showed they couldn't believe what was happening. They thought they were important because they thought they had access to certain things, held mental power over others, and had a lot of power. It was all taken away. Not because of a fight or revenge, but because you quietly made it clear that honor, ethics, and self-respect. You had taken yourself out of their story, but not out of your mind, and that was too much to take. The irony was clear and impossible to miss. You set the rules, even though they thought they were in charge. You didn't have to follow them, make them agree with you, or even say they were there. You quietly showed that access is a privilege, not a right, by living on your own terms and respecting your growth, clarity, and peace.